Have you ever felt the ground shift beneath your feet when she suddenly transforms from loving partner to emotional hurricane? That moment when her reactions seem completely disconnected from reality, leaving you questioning your own sanity? Today, you're about to discover what Carl Jung, the pioneering psychoanalyst, exposed about female psychological immaturity and how it silently destroys relationships from within. This hidden truth has remained buried in academic psychology for decades, but understanding it will fundamentally transform how you navigate every interaction with women. The pain you've experienced is real. Those moments of confusion when logical conversation devolves into emotional chaos. The frustration of being accused of things you never did or intended. The exhaustion of walking on eggshells, never knowing what might trigger the next emotional storm. This psychological whiplash doesn't just damage relationships, it breaks down your sense of reality, your confidence, and ultimately, your ability to connect authentically. But there's a solution hidden within Jung's deepest insights, one that few men ever discover. By understanding the unconscious archetypal forces driving immature female emotional responses, you gain something invaluable: clarity. No longer will you be tossed about by seemingly random emotional currents. Instead, you'll recognize the patterns, understand their origins, and know exactly how to maintain your psychological sovereignty while fostering genuine connection. At the center of Jung's understanding of female psychology lies the concept of the animus, the masculine aspect within the female unconscious. Just as men possess an anima, inner feminine, women carry this masculine counterpart that profoundly shapes their emotional reactions, particularly in intimate relationships. When you witness emotional immaturity in women, you're often seeing an unintegrated animus at work. This psychological structure develops during childhood, shaped by fathers, brothers, male teachers, and cultural representations of masculinity. When insufficiently developed or integrated, it creates exactly the patterns of behavior that leave you feeling confused and destabilized. You see, unlike the anima in men, which often manifests as mood fluctuations or romantic projections, the unintegrated animus expresses itself through rigid opinions, cutting criticisms, and impulsive reactivity. Think about those moments when she suddenly becomes absolutely certain of your intentions, usually negative ones, without evidence. That's the immature animus speaking with unearned authority. Have you noticed how some women seem to attribute thoughts, feelings, and motivations to you that you've never experienced? This psychological mechanism is called projection, and it's particularly powerful when emerging from an unintegrated animus. When a woman hasn't consciously recognized and integrated her own masculine aspects, they don't disappear. They operate autonomously from the shadows of her unconscious. These disowned parts seek expression and recognition, usually by being projected onto the nearest available man, you. The cruel irony is that the more emotionally intimate you become, the more likely you are to become the screen for these projections. This explains the common experience of a relationship beginning wonderfully, only to deteriorate as deeper intimacy develops. As you move closer, you inadvertently activate deeper layers of her unintegrated animus. You might recognize these projections when you hear phrases like, "You always think I'm not good enough. You just want to control me. You don't respect my independence." When these accusations seem to come from nowhere, leaving you bewildered, you're likely experiencing animus projections rather than responses to your actual behavior. Jung observed that emotional immaturity often manifests as seeking external validation and security, rather than developing internal psychological resources. This pattern is particularly destructive in relationships. When a woman has not developed her own internal masculine structure, the part of psyche that provides direction, boundaries, and objective thinking, she unconsciously seeks these functions from external sources, primarily from her partner. You've likely experienced this dynamic if you've ever felt that no matter how much reassurance you provide, it's never enough. The emotional neediness doesn't diminish with your support, it often intensifies. This is because you're being asked to fulfill a psychological function that can only truly be developed within her own psyche. This external seeking creates a dangerous dependency. Rather than developing her own inner resources, she becomes increasingly reliant on you to provide emotional stability, direction, and validation. This not only exhausts you but prevents her psychological growth, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of immaturity. One of the most disorienting aspects of relating to emotional immaturity is encountering fragmented responses, reactions that seem completely disconnected from context or proportionality. Jung understood that integration is the hallmark of psychological maturity. An integrated psyche responds to situations holistically, with emotional reactions that are appropriate to circumstances. The unintegrated psyche, however, responds in fragments, with emotional reactions that seem to emerge from different personas or parts. You've experienced this fragmentation when she reacts with disproportionate anger to minor issues, or when emotional reactions seem to have no logical connection to current circumstances. This fragmentation occurs because unintegrated aspects of the psyche operate autonomously, without the moderating influence of the whole personality. This explains why you can sometimes feel like you're dealing with multiple different people in the same relationship. In a sense, you're encountering different fragmented aspects of an unintegrated psyche, each operating according to its own emotional logic. The most profound revelation in Jung's understanding of female psychological immaturity comes when we recognize the specific archetypal patterns that emerge in relationship crises. These aren't random emotional outbursts. They follow distinct archetypal scripts that have been replaying throughout human history. When a relationship reaches its breaking point due to emotional immaturity, you'll witness a constellation of specific behaviors that Jung would identify as archetypal manifestations of the shadow animus. First comes the emotional accusation, a moment when you're suddenly cast as the villain in a narrative you don't recognize. This isn't merely disagreement. It's a profound psychological projection where her unowned shadow material is attributed to you with absolute certainty. The emotional conviction behind these accusations feels unshakable, precisely because it emerges from unconscious material that she cannot see in herself. Then follows the emotional manipulation, what modern psychology might call emotional blackmail. This takes the form of ultimatums, threatened abandonment, or weaponized vulnerability. These aren't conscious strategies, but unconscious patterns emerging from the part of her psyche that hasn't developed mature ways of addressing conflict or expressing needs. Finally comes the insatiable need for reassurance, a bottomless emotional void that no amount of validation seems to fill. This represents the unintegrated animus's inability to provide internal structure and affirmation, creating a psychological vacuum that constantly seeks external filling. What makes this pattern so destructive is its cyclical nature. Each time this archetypal drama plays out, it further entrenches the pattern rather than resolving it. Like a record stuck in a groove, the relationship keeps hitting the same emotional notes without progression toward maturity. The most devastating impact on you as a man is the gradual erosion of your psychological foundation. As you're repeatedly cast into these archetypal roles without understanding the underlying dynamics, you begin to doubt your own perceptions, question your worth, and lose connection with your authentic self. Jung called this process identification with the projected content. You begin to believe that you are what you're accused of being. This is the hidden truth that Jung exposed. Immature female psychology doesn't just damage relationships, it fundamentally alters your relationship with yourself. By projecting unconscious material onto you, and then reacting to those projections as if they were reality, the unintegrated animus creates a psychological hall of mirrors where authentic connection becomes impossible. Now that you've glimpsed the profound psychological mechanisms Jung uncovered, you stand at a crossroads in your understanding of relationships. This knowledge isn't just theoretical, it's transformative when applied with wisdom and compassion. The path forward involves a dual recognition, understanding the animus projections you encounter while refusing to become entangled in them. This doesn't mean becoming cold or distant, but rather developing what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the ability to remain present without losing your center. When you recognize an animus projection emerging, you can maintain presence without accepting the projected role. You can listen without absorbing accusations. You can set boundaries without becoming rigid. Most importantly, you can see beyond the projection to the human being struggling with her own unconscious material. Remember that integration is a lifelong journey for all of us. By maintaining your psychological clarity, You create a space where genuine relationship becomes possible, not between projected fantasies, but between two people committed to consciousness. As you move forward with this understanding, notice how your interactions change. Pay attention to those moments when you would previously have been drawn into emotionally charged dynamics, but now can observe them with clarity. This shift from unconscious reaction to conscious response is the essence of psychological maturity that Jung devoted his life to cultivating. I'd like to hear about your experiences with these dynamics in the comments below. Have you encountered these patterns in your relationships? How has understanding them changed your perspective? Your insights not only deepen your own understanding, but contribute to our collective psychological growth. If this exploration of Jungian psychology has resonated with you, please support our continued work by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And don't miss our previous videos exploring other aspects of depth psychology and its application to modern relationships. The journey toward psychological maturity is perhaps the most important work of our lives. By bringing consciousness to these hidden patterns, you not only transform your relationships, but contribute to the psychological evolution Jung believed was essential for humanity's future. One of the most illuminating aspects of Jung's work is his recognition of the child archetype and how it manifests in adult relationships. When emotional immaturity dominates a relationship, you're often witnessing the emergence of this powerful archetypal energy in its unintegrated form. The child archetype carries both positive and shadow aspects. In its positive expression, it brings spontaneity, wonder, and creative potential. But in its shadow form, particularly when activated by relationship stress, it manifests as psychological regression, emotional dependency, and primitive defensive reactions. You've likely witnessed this regression in moments of relationship conflict. A conversation about practical matters suddenly devolves into emotional reactions more appropriate to a child than an adult. Reasonable requests trigger disproportionate feelings of abandonment or criticism. These aren't manipulative strategies. They're unconscious regressions to earlier developmental stages. Jung observed that we all carry these earlier psychological structures within us. Maturity doesn't mean eliminating them, but integrating them into a more complex whole. When integration hasn't occurred, stress activates these earlier structures, and adult functioning temporarily collapses. This explains the bewildering experience of relating to someone who can be intellectually sophisticated, professionally accomplished, and socially adept, yet in intimate relationships reverts to emotional patterns more appropriate to adolescence or childhood. Different contexts activate different aspects of the psyche, and intimate relationships uniquely activate our earliest attachment patterns and unresolved developmental material. Another crucial element in understanding female psychological immaturity is what Jung called the mother complex, the psychological imprint left by the relationship with the mother, which profoundly shapes adult relationship expectations and behaviors. An unresolved mother complex creates specific patterns in adult relationships that you may have encountered. A woman with a negative mother complex might unconsciously expect you to provide the nurturing and validation she didn't receive in childhood, an impossible task that leads to perpetual disappointment. Alternatively, a woman overly identified with a powerful mother figure might struggle with intimacy, unconsciously fearing the vulnerability that comes with deep connection. You've experienced the effects of the mother complex when relationship dynamics take on a parent-child quality rather than an adult-to-adult connection. This might manifest as expectations that you should intuitively know her needs without communication, resentment when you fail to provide perfect attunement, or emotional withdrawal when you assert your own needs. Jung recognized that we all carry parental complexes, but psychological maturity involves recognizing these patterns and gradually differentiating our adult selves from these internal parental images. When this differentiation hasn't occurred, relationships become stages for replaying childhood dynamics rather than creating new, mature connections. Jung's concept of the persona, the social mask we present to the world, offers another valuable insight into relationship difficulties stemming from emotional immaturity. Psychological maturity involves developing a flexible, appropriate persona while maintaining connection with our authentic self. Immaturity often manifests as either over-identification with the persona, leading to superficial relationships, or rejection of appropriate persona development, leading to social difficulties and boundary issues. You may have experienced the confusion of relating to someone whose public and private selves seem radically different. The capable, confident professional becomes insecure and demanding in intimate settings. The socially charming individual becomes controlling or withdrawn behind closed doors. These discrepancies reflect insufficient integration between the persona and the authentic self. This split creates particular challenges in relationships, as intimacy requires gradually revealing what lies beneath our social masks. When someone lacks a coherent sense of self beneath the persona, greater intimacy doesn't lead to deeper connection, but to confusion, anxiety, and often relationship-sabotaging behaviors. Jung observed that developing authenticity while maintaining appropriate social adaptability is a crucial developmental task. When this development is incomplete, relationships suffer from either excessive performance, maintaining the persona even in intimate settings, or lack of appropriate boundaries, discarding all social adaptation in favor of unfiltered emotional expression. The path toward greater psychological maturity, what Jung called individuation, offers hope for transcending these destructive relationship patterns. This process isn't about achieving perfection, but about bringing greater consciousness to previously unconscious material. For women struggling with animus integration, the journey involves recognizing and withdrawing projections, developing internal resources for validation and direction, and integrating masculine qualities in a way that enhances rather than diminishes feminine identity. This isn't about becoming more like men, but about developing wholeness by integrating complementary aspects of the psyche. For you as a partner, understanding this process allows you to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity. By refusing to accept projected roles while remaining compassionate about the struggle behind them, you create a relationship environment that supports rather than hinders psychological growth. Jung believed that relationships provide our greatest opportunities for psychological development, precisely because they activate our deepest unconscious material. By bringing consciousness to these patterns, both partners can move toward greater wholeness. The ultimate aim of the individuation process that Jung saw as humanity's most important psychological task.